So I'm going to start bringing in the SNY TV's Baseball Night in New York staff crew. I'm getting tired. Sorry about stumbling over my own stuff. But all right, here comes Doug Williams.
Hey,
Sal
Keith.
Licata. Hey, Doug.
What's up, Keith?
Hey, Sal. Love the figures behind you.
Thank you, dude. I appreciate it.
No problem. Here's Jim Duquette, and we're bringing in Andy Martino also.
Hello, how you doing?
Hey, guys. So I just wanted to thank all you guys for coming and spending your time on a Saturday doing this. We always love having you guys. I need a break from talking for a few minutes. I'm going to leave it to the professionals. So thank you, guys. Thank you for being here. Thank you for the Baseball Night in New York. And I'm going to disappear for a second. I'm going to be lurking in the background, but this is all you guys. My one question, do you want comments live or do you want to hold them off to the end? Like if any questions or anything or?
I think I'm going to, as we go along, if we have a break in our conversation or something, I'll defer to either you or Michael Flynn and we'll get comments as they come on. So they don't need to be live because we obviously have a lot to talk about, but we'll get to them as they come in as the show.
What are you guys talking about? There was nothing going on this offseason, nothing at all. All right,
man.
So I'm going to leave it to you guys. I'm out. I'll see you in a little bit.
Keith, thank you. Thanks again to Keith and Dan for this because this is as good as it gets for 2020 and 2021. We wish we were talking to all of you that are watching in person. There's nothing more fun, especially for our show. I mean, this is the kind of stuff we do every day, but it was special to be able to do it in front of real, live, actual Mets fans. It's a bummer we can't be doing that today, but we're thrilled to be doing this. And, you know, we had all four of you were on Baseball Night in New York last night, which I may say was a fairly epic program. Like I think we have like special shows every now and then. Last night was a particularly good one.
Special, all right.
Yeah, I started the show by calling Andy Martino Annie Martino, which was an alter ego that I actually think set the show in motion.
It set the tone.
Yeah, it set the tone for the rest of the show. Sal had an all-time rant, which is on Twitter if you haven't seen it, about just how many times it came up in lineup card, how many times he was checking Twitter during the Trevor Bauer insanity.
Yeah, I don't think I was alone, by the way, either with that. I mean, we're all in the same boat, which is why it was relatable. It was infuriating.
I was about to say that, like, there was a group of us, and I'm sure all of our viewers were included, that was in this like foxhole yesterday of, okay, which caps are up on the Bauer website right now for auction that he's signed? What does that potentially mean? It was nuts. So let's start with Bauer, obviously. And in case you're not aware, so Andy Martino is MLB insider for SNY. He's on the show 2 or 3 times a week, but he does everything at the network. Jim Duquette's former general manager of the New York Mets. He's one of our baseball analysts as well. He does some satellite radio stuff for MLB network satellite radio. You can listen to him in the mornings. Sal Licata is on WFAN. He's on SNY. He is a truly passionate Mets fan. That's why we love having him on the show, because he helps bring to life some of what you guys are thinking at home that you probably don't see a lot of representation of on television. Let's start with Bauer. So, Andy, do you think yesterday tells the story of why he chose the Dodgers, or does it go back much further than that? Like, how far back does the story go in terms of your reporting about why he ended up in LA?
That's a good, interesting way to think about it, actually. I would start by echoing what you said, Doug, to the people out there watching. It's so weird because it's like we don't see you or feel you, or like, you know, I'm trusting someone's watching. I don't see any metrics on that. Hopefully there's plenty of you out there, but it was so fun a couple of years ago to get in that space with everybody and interact and just hear, you know, it's actually very replenishing for me. It's like why I do this, meeting the audience. It's like I'm reporting on stuff and like trying to figure out what's going on. And then to see people it happens less than you would think, to see people who are really passionate about the team in the way that the people who go to QBC are, because I'm talking to sources and stuff. It's a different world. So it's cool to interact with the audience. I hope we can do it again next year. Anyway.
Me too.
Bauer to the Dodgers. It's interesting because the way it worked out, you do wonder if he ever would have come to the Mets, or if the Mets would have really had to overpay. The Mets offered $105 million, put on a full court press. I can tell you that part of their pitch, and I haven't reported this, so this is exclusive to you guys. Like, it's a little nugget. Like, the Mets' pitch to Bauer was partly, if you go to the Dodgers, they just won. They've got Kershaw. You go there, you can be just another guy. They didn't say this, but it's almost like Durant going to Golden State. It's like, hey, it'll be great. You guys will be great. But if you come to the Mets and win a World Series for the first time since 1986 and do it at the top of the rotation with Jacob deGrom, you could be an icon. And I think the Dodgers were more like, you could live in Beverly Hills and the New York media won't be there. and he's from California. And ultimately, we don't know exactly why he was receptive to the Dodger pitch, but the Mets offered more money. They offered the chance to be on this stage that was unique to what you can do as a Dodger. And, you have to assume that Bauer didn't want it. You have to assume, you can draw your own conclusions, and I don't want to be quoted as saying as to why he didn't want it. But I think that I know a lot of people that are pretty tough online and maybe not so much in person.
Yeah, that's a common thing. So, Jim, how common is that in a pitch to a player that's like, this is what you could be. If you succeed here, this is what you build up this idea in their head. Is that part of what you talk about when you're trying to woo a free agent to your team?
I think there's a lot of factors with it. It's a good question. Like we did a full-on recruiting video, and when we were there, and it resonated with Pedro, and it resonated with Beltran, it resonated with Mike Cameron. Didn't resonate with Carlos Delgado quite as much, but of course, Omar ends up trading for Delgado later. So it really depends. You have to try to figure that. That's what part of this recruiting process is all about. Is trying to find out what's important to the player, and then creating your pitch around that. So we know that there's an analytics portion to that for Trevor Bauer. We know there's a social media aspect to it. And there's a whole scrutiny level that I think comes with what he what he's done in the past. I'm not totally convinced that it would have been a good fit for him in New York. I think there is much more of a potential problem. I'm not gonna throw out potential guys that have failed in New York. I don't want to go take it that far because it's a moot point. But I don't think it was going to be as good of a fit, and it would have kept me up at night if I was the general manager, wondering, oh man, what is he posting on the social media side? Do I have to sleep with one eye open on his social media page? That is never a good thing, in my opinion. So I think that they're in a lot of ways, this team is good enough without Bauer, and they can make a trade later to improve it. That's number one. And by the way, Carlos Carrasco is a very good pitcher that doesn't get mentioned all that much. And two, Trevor Bauer, it's a mixed bag depending on who you speak to, on whether they thought he was a good teammate or not, whether he was a distraction or not. And I'm not sure I want to take my chances with that type of guy with that kind of money.
Okay, so Sal, just like last night on Baseball Night in New York, which I should say, by the way, weeknight 6:00 on SNY, in case you don't already watch. I saved you for last because I know people are on here just to hear your opinion. But what I find interesting, the nuance of your opinion isn't like that you've been full court press. I love Trevor Bauer for the Mets. He's going to be great if they sign him. It's like, I've been waiting a long time for the Mets to be the team that gets the big name free agents. You have not had that for some years. You were looking forward to it this offseason because there were a lot of free agents that fit Mets needs. Bauer was the last one. They didn't get him. So is your passion and anger Bauer specific, or is it looking back on an offseason that you think is mostly missed opportunities?
I think it's more the latter there. A couple of things. First, with Bauer, as you said, it got to a point where Bauer was the last man standing, and I was like, all right, well, other people want him. He's the last guy that could be a difference maker. Might as well go all in. At this point, it's Bauer or bust. Turned out to be bust. The anger and frustration comes from the way that Bauer played the Mets. That ticks me off because for 10 years or so, the Mets didn't have the finances to be in the conversation with the top free agents. Now, their fan base gets their hope up, not to mention the fake report by Nightingale, which gets their hopes up. So you have the fan base who's starved, right, for the top free agent. Their team is finally in on everybody. They didn't get Real Muto. They didn't get Springer. You know who they didn't get? Bauer's the last one left. Down to 2. They were flirting. Alderson likes Bauer. Bauer's playing back and forth. The report comes out. He's coming to the Mets. You start getting that hope up again and the excitement. Forget about whether you think he's going to be good or not. There's the excitement there. And it all turns out that he just wanted to go home and play for the Dodgers, and the Mets offered him more money, and he turned that down. So now the Met fan is losing out on free agents, not because they don't have enough money, because this guy was playing them because he wanted to jack up the price to go home. So that's where the anger and frustration comes with Bauer from a guy who, you're right, Doug, I never wanted. My mantra this offseason before Bauer or bust was it's Springer who the Mets offseason hinges on the acquisition of George Springer, a guy who was a perfect fit for what I thought that they needed, a legit center fielder, an impact bat who's proven in the postseason that they needed that, a right-handed bat to boot. Once they lost out on him, I knew this offseason wasn't going to be as exciting as I had hoped. And there is an element to just the excitement level. Now that we're a day old here with the Bauer stuff, the Mets aren't a bad team. And I never said that. I never said they weren't going to be a team that could compete for a postseason spot. But to get to that next level, when you look at what the Yankees do, what the Dodgers do, that's what the Met fans deserve. That's what I want. My expectations are raised. So are the owners, by the way. He said it himself. He has the highest of expectations. You know what? He's right. Well, so do I. You want to root for a team like the Pirates, go root for them. But we're in New York City here. The expectations should be through the roof to where the Yankees are. That's where it comes from, where there are so many names out there. And yeah, the Mets upgraded, and they got one of the best players, if not the best player available in Lindor. To me, it still wasn't enough. They could have done more. They needed more. And unfortunately, they didn't get it.
By the way, quick note just to you guys. First of all, Keith and Dan, this technology is great. I like being able to talk this seamlessly and be able to see the questions, which I'm about to read this well, is really cool. So to our panelists, like the good old days, if you disagree or you want to jump in after, don't wait for me. Just do it, because I think that there's less of a delay than usual. So this is a question from Joseph Morgan. Does Justin Turner, Trevor Rosenthal, Taijuan Walker, or James Paxton and JBJ make better sense for the Mets at the same annual cost as Bauer? Jim, in your answer a second ago, did you say that you think the Mets can still make a trade? Like, what do you think that they're still going to be active on the trade market, or do you think they're looking at that list of remaining free agents more closely?
I think they're looking at the free agents mostly. I think that they would like to add more pitching. I think they also, at least from what I was told, they're having dialogue on the center field market with JBJ. And so, I think that's their next course in pitching. It could be starter or reliever. Doesn't matter. It could be one of each, any combination. There's a lot of trade possibilities at the moment that I can tell. I know that, there was a lot of rumors around Sonny Gray earlier. I know Sonny Gray didn't pitch well with the Yankees. I wouldn't be as concerned about him, but I don't think he's available. So I think it's kind of there's no need to really bring that up at this point. Seems like he's staying in Cincinnati. So I can't find another pitcher that you can get via trade, nor can I find a center fielder. So it seems right now, and I know Andy's been monitoring this closely also, it's really, all right, who is available of the starting pitchers? Are they in on Rizzi, Taijuan Walker, James Paxton? Doesn't sound like it, but I wouldn't rule out, one of those, or they could pivot and go back to one of them, or any of the other starting pitchers that are available. Bullpen-wise, Rosenthal certainly fits. There's Shane Green, there's others, Mark Melancon, but Rosenthal is the best of that bunch. And even a guy like Justin Turner is available. It doesn't seem like, though, that's the option that the Mets are going to take. It seems like the Dodgers or the Brewers are in on Justin Turner.
Yeah, I would add to that, Joseph. I was thinking about when Jim was talking, I was thinking about the aspect of your question that was the same annual cost as Bauer. So let's say Bauer's 40. I think these players combined would be significantly more than $40 million. I think Jackie Bradley Jr. is expensive. Like, we're talking, Jim, well over $50 million, right? What they're looking for. I don't know if he's going to get it, but in total, right, not annually. Yeah. So 15 to 20 a year on Bradley, Turner, up over 10, I would think. Paxton, I heard Paxton was looking for like 15 or so on his own. I don't know if he's going to get it. He did a showcase. Unfortunately, not a lot of interest came out of that. So you worry about the medicals for a guy who could be great. But going through that, my point is that unfortunately, that's way too much all of those guys or types of guys like that to compare to Bauer. And what I hear is that the Mets are willing to go over the luxury tax for Bauer, but now that Bauer is off the table, they probably don't want to go with the luxury tax just like randomly anyway. It was like more about Bauer on that front. But not to be too dire about it, I completely agree with Jim. They're going to add a pitcher. Jake Arrieta was not on your list, but that's someone who I'm told that they have direct interest in more so than Paxton, Walker, or Odorizzi, who Jim mentioned. And Rosenthal doesn't make a lot of sense for them. Turner, that was a bad divorce with the Mets. That's the thing. They kind of, not only did they foolishly non-tender him when he was about to become a star, but they kind of trashed him anonymously on the way out. And Turner did not, as one would imagine, appreciate that very much.
I'm trying to, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, none of those players. I mean, come on now. And this is where, and I actually like from the Mets perspective that there's, okay, well, we missed out on the big fish in Bauer. I'm not wasting it here just to spend money. It's enough of the quantity instead of quality. I want the quality. I don't want this quantity. And I'm not paying Jackie Bradley Jr. as badly as I want a defensive center fielder, because Nimmo's not a center fielder. I'm not paying Jackie Bradley Jr. 15 to 20 million bucks a year because he's not worth it. I'm not looking to be a bookkeeper here with the Mets where people saying, oh, you can't get Springer or you can't get Bauer because then you can't sign or extend Conforto or Lindor. No, I'm not worried about that, but I am worried about wasting money on subpar players. James Paxton, you know the reason why starting rotations need depth around Major League Baseball? Because of guys like James Paxton, because he can't stay healthy and take his starts every fifth day. So because of guys like him, that's why everybody's always talking about, oh, you need rotation depth and you need depth in that starting rotation in case somebody gets hurt. That's what Paxton is. Now, I like the upside there because there's potential. That's what lures you in thinking, oh, man, if he ever could stay healthy, he could be a dominant guy at a cheap price. But I want a guy who I know is going to be healthy every fifth day and can eat innings more so than a guy with that upside. I want a known commodity that could fill out the rotation. So none of those guys, even Justin Turner, all right, he's a nice player, and he did great with the Dodgers after he left the Mets. He's older. He's on the decline. Plus, as Andy said, the way that it was, I'm not going back down the Justin Turner road again. I think the Mets had their big moves to make. Unfortunately, they only ended up with, a couple of the guys, McCann and Lindor and Carrasco were the big ones. And you know what? See what happens at the trade deadline.
Jim, wasn't it you last night who said that Paxton might be interesting because it was you or Record that basically you're getting Syndergaard and Paxton, similar pitchers from opposite sides. And if you're getting half of a season from Syndergaard, right, and you can only rely on 150 innings at most from Paxton, that you kind of have one dominant pitcher between the two?
That's the way I viewed it. Paxton, has never thrown 30 starts, and I think the max he's thrown is 26. When he's healthy, the stuff is electric, but you can't count on him for more than 10 or 15 starts. And Syndergaard's the same thing. You can't expect him to pitch more than 10 or 15 times as well. So I think if it was worked out that way, I think it would be really interesting to see both of those guys in the same rotation at some point, or at least maybe take up one roster spot in those number of innings. Now, I checked it after the show to see if the Mets were in on Paxton, and it did not seem like they had any conversation regarding James Paxton. To Andy's point, there had been more talk about Arrieta, and so it didn't seem like at this point that Paxton was going to be a viable option. Now, having said all that, when you're all in on Bauer, as they were, and at the end, there's always a fallout from that, and you could go back and double back on some of those other guys that you basically told them, hey, we'll pass on, or hey, we're not interested now, or whatever. You can go back and see what the price tag is on that. So I think that's the next part of this with the Mets and their front office, is to go back and look and see who's still available, who is realistically has a chance for us to sign, what's that look like cost wise, and then decide if that makes sense to bring them in or go to spring training with the roster as is.
Before I get to the question from fake Uncle Steve, which I'm just going to assume is the real Uncle Steve.
It's a good name for a burner.
I keep trying to remind myself that these off-season storylines where we're like, well, if the Mets get Jackie Bradley Jr., where's Brandon Nimmo going to play? Like, those figure themselves out. We're always panicking about that in January and February, and then spring training starts and somebody has a hamstring problem, and you're like, well, it's good the Mets have so-and-so. It just always ends up helping out. And so if the Mets do get JBJ, I'm not worried about Nimmo. I think they find him at bats, and that's what he needs at bats. He does not need to play in center field. At least that's my opinion. All right. So it's, as you see at the bottom of your screen, do you think the Mets would have gone higher on Real Muto if they knew they would not get Springer or Bauer? The one point that I would make here, and we had Joe DeMeo earlier on the QBC panel, and he made the point when Real Muto signed with the Phillies at the end of the day, that if the Mets had stayed in on him, that price would have been higher, especially early. They would have been able to wait the Mets out because they know that the Mets have infinite resources. It ended up being one obvious team for Real Muto, and he still got a lot of money. So, Andy, like, how do you think they view the McCann signing now? Like, how do you think Sandy feels about it now?
Good about it. They were never in on Real Muto. I mean, the issue was price, because it was like 150 million or more back in November or whenever they signed. It's all, I don't know. I've been at my house for 10 months. And I think it was November. It's all blending together. But at that time, the issue with Real Muto was price, but it was also pace of the free agency. Real Muto's people made it clear that he wasn't going to sign soon. He was really going to wait the market and see how it went. And the Mets are just like, yeah, we don't like you enough to hold up our offseason on this. Sorry. And especially, I think being a catcher really didn't help. It was like, if you're going to give big money to a 30 or 31-year-old, he's 30, Springer's 31, you'd rather give it to an outfielder than a catcher at that age, a long-term deal. They real hesitation between investing that much in a catcher, and one who has had some issues with his hips last year, which is a little bit worrisome. So it was never going to be a match. The Mets and Real Muto was a Brody era thing. Brody really liked the player. Sandy era Mets, it wasn't going to happen. I mean, it might have happened at the deal he got. I think it was 115 with significant deferrals. Not a great contract for Real Muto. He didn't do particularly well in free agency, and that might have worked for the Mets. But they were very happy to just get James McCann, who they like, and then move on. And it enabled them to turn their attention toward the Lindor trade, which I still contend was the big splash that they needed to make this offseason. When people talk about I hear what you're saying, Sal, and I don't want to dismiss it because you're coming from fan emotion place, and I get that. But my perspective is that the big fish were the three big free agents, Springer, Real Muto, and Bauer, and Lindor, the big trade guy. And I feel like those were the four big stars, and you should get one of them, and they got one of them. And I think that just dealing with catcher real quick allowed them to do Lindor.
Well, hold on one second here before I answer with the catcher situation. Do you think, because it's not just a fan's perspective, do you think the Mets are as good as the Dodgers or the Yankees, for example?
Not just yet, but remember, it took the Dodgers. Well, hold on, though. It took the Dodgers 7 years, I think, of the new ownership to win a World Series. I think in year one of what Steve Cohen and Sandy Alderson are doing, it's been a tremendous offseason where they added high-end talent, one huge star, a really good pitcher in Carrasco, Trevor May. I mean, it's been a great offseason to me for the Mets, and they've got themselves in the conversation at the top tier of the National League. And then, maybe you don't win a World Series for 7 years, and it's still very successful.
It's year one for them. It's year 41 for me and other fans.
That's why I brought you up and couched it, and I get there's emotion here.
But it's not just that. I just wanted them. And look, here's the other thing. The Mets themselves, Cohen, Alderson, they have said it. They know they're more than one piece away. So they can say that it's going to take time.
But
and
they've
by the
added
way,
5 pieces.
Right. By the way, well, I mean, they still know that obviously they know they need more. They were in on Springer. They just didn't want to go the extra year. They wanted to get Bauer. They offered him the most money. So it's not just me saying, crazy fan, I want more. They obviously knew that the fan base wants more.
No one's called you crazy fan today except for yourself. I just want to know. I was very respectful.
They know the fans wanted more, and B, they know that they needed more. Now, to be positive for a second, and I'm with you. I don't think that they're an awful team. I think that they're going to be a solid team. They should legitimately contend for a playoff spot. My expectations are World Series, and obviously I don't think they're there yet, but I love the McCann signing. I think McCann's going to be the better player. If you project the next 3-4 years, I think McCann will be the better. And I used to love Real Muto. I think McCann's going to be the better player and a better fit for this team. I think he's going to handle the staff better. I like his makeup. I think it's going to be successful in New York. All I wanted was a star defensive catcher. I think they're getting that with McCann. The offense, whatever you get from him, I think will be a bonus. But the way he's excited to work with Stroman and DeGrom and everybody, Peterson, everybody else, I think McCann's going to turn out to be a much better signing pound for pound than JT Realmuto.
We have a question coming in from Anakin Skywalker. First of all, Anakin, thank you.
Thanks for
being
taking the
here.
time.
Yeah, thanks for taking the time. I know that there's wars to fight and just a lot of chaos out there. Jim, are the Cubs still shopping Chris Bryant? I thought he'd be dealt by now. I confess that I did too. That's my own opinion, but I'm curious to know whether you think they'd go back, the Mets would, into the trade market and trade more talent for a Bryant in addition to Lindor.
So about 2 weeks ago, on the award-winning BNNY show, I said that Chris Bryant is not going to be traded anymore. I was told that the Cubs had a conversation with Chris Bryant about him not being traded. They were at this point going to go, unless there was an unusual trade where there was, in their opinion, an overpay. Chris Bryant was going to be a Cub coming to spring training, and so that ship has passed from the Cubs side of things, unless someone was willing, Mets or anyone else, willing to overpay. And I don't think Bryant had the type of year last year that I think that's why the Cubs didn't trade him. They went around the entire league in places that were needing a third baseman. They didn't get what they were looking for, and so they're going to hold him until trade deadline. So that's an option potentially for the Mets if they feel like there's a need there later in the summer. But right now, Bryant is not available.
And I would just say about third base real quick too. They're happy with JD Davis. They feel like, look, he's JD Davis. You're not gonna set that in stone. If something better comes along, that's fine. But they traded away 11 years of team control, I think, between the two shortstops that they traded to Cleveland. So the fact that Davis is early in his career and has a lot of control left means something to a front office, and has a lot to do with why I think the odds are that Davis will be the first opening day third baseman.
I know the Mets just won their arbitration case against him, and having talked to Jim a lot about arbitration hearings, I don't feel like that's a healthy marriage right now between JD and the Mets, but that's just the way those things work. I guess you just have to move forward, and they're just fighting over hundreds of thousands of dollars, which is so fascinating to me. Elizabeth asks, any thoughts about playing Conforto in center instead of Nimmo if they don't add a center fielder? Jim, Conforto is pretty much viewed as a right fielder at this point, correct? Not a center field option?
Yeah. Yeah, and to Elizabeth's point, though, he did play well when he played in center field a couple of years ago. But I know that the team feels, and Conforto's people recently even told me that he wants to play right field solely, and that's the best thing for him, both offensively and defensively. He's a plus defender in center field, or right field rather, and the offense should be there as well. So I think when you're trying to make those type of decisions, and whether it's better for the team or not, I'm not saying that at some point at the end of the year, if Nimmo didn't work out well, or if they were looking for more offense, or there was an injury somewhere, whatever, they wouldn't maybe temporarily put Conforto as center field. But I think it's their plan and goal to keep him in right field for the entire season, and I think that's how you're going to get the most production out of him.
All right, I want to go around the horn on Eric's question here. Do the Mets extend any of the big guys on their last year before the season? So let's start with Sal here, because one thing that I find really interesting that we talk about on the show a lot is the idea of wanting or needing to see Lindor play his first season in a Mets uniform in New York after an off year last year in 2020. And Conforto put together a 162 season that he had last year. Sal, do you feel like you need to see either of those things before you approach the player, or are you ready to give Conforto and Lindor extensions today?
Tough question. I really look, me personally, and I don't know why the fans are all caught up in this. I don't ever remember caring before the season started. One thing during the year, all right, the guy's playing, he's playing well. Remember the Mets acquired Piazza. Jim, obviously you remember well. And there was talk about, is he going to resign? What's going on with Piazza? That's different to me than where we're at now, where it's been so much focused on these two guys before we even get into their final season here. I think I know what Conforto is. I think I also know what he wants to get paid like, and I'm not so sure that what he is and what he's going to want to be paid like would jive for me. Lindor, again, I maybe want to see a little more with him because he hasn't played in New York yet at all, so maybe I could wait that out. I would prefer to wait until the offseason. I mean, the Mets have enough money here. This is New York City. We should get back to the days where you're not losing the players that you have on your roster because they're signing for more money elsewhere unless you don't want them. So I wouldn't be in a rush to lock everybody up now. Oh, let's get it done so we can save a couple $1 million. Let it play out. I mean, it's a long year. Let it play out. They want to test free agency. Let them be it. Here's what we have to offer. You know what New York is. We want you back. This is our, you could go test the market and come back to us. Fine. I'm not in any hurry to get these guys locked up. You know what? If Lindor wants to go somewhere else, let's say he doesn't have success here, he wants to go somewhere else, there'll be other players that the Mets could go get. They will get players now because they have the money. So I don't need to be locked in to just those two guys. I know what they are, but maybe Lindor specifically, I want to see him play a little bit in New York.
I think I really agree with everything you just said, and I really strongly like the first part where you said about like why are we so caught up in this stuff now? And I think it's partly the fault of those of us who write about it too. I've thought about that. I wrote a story last week about Conforto's potential contract situation. I reported it out and talked to a lot of people and stuff. But there's so many numbers in the story, and I wrote it, and I was kind of like, this is like not a sports story. Like, when did we become so consumed by contract details, or like our readers become so consumed with it? I think it's an interesting question you ask. I don't have the whole answer to it, but it's like Lindor himself actually made a good point on his introductory Zoom. It was a deflection, but still, he's like, let's live in the moment. It's like, let's just enjoy it. And you make a good point. Like, what's the rush? And I actually do want to see Lindor play because he had a down year last year. And there's some questions over his ability to hit velocity as even though he's only 27, his numbers on fastballs above 93, 95 miles an hour, it's been in steady decline. You don't want to give him 10 years and be like, whoops, he's lost a step. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but I like what you're saying about like, when were we talking about the business of the sport all the time? Like, when did that start? It's a good point.
Yeah, I'll tell you the other thing real quick on that is, there was a time where if, like with Piazza, going back to what you brought out, like legitimately, like we traded for him in the middle of the season, and he didn't want to talk until at the end of the season. And we made a huge push to keep him at the end of that year before he became a free agent, before he could even announce it. We ended up signing him to a record deal. Okay. But now, and there was a day where there was a feeling with agents and players, like if you didn't sign this guy up before he became a free agent, he is not coming back, right? But if you look just to this year's free agent group, LeMahieu re-signed with the Yankees, Realmuto re-signed with the Phillies, Ozuna just re-signed with the Braves. There's three examples right there of guys that went out on free agents to the free agent market, tried to see if they could get anything more, and went back to their old teams. And so I think that I'd say over the last 4 or 5 years, that's been a better play. That it's not a guarantee that if they're out in the free agent market, they're leaving. And I think that even if they don't come to a deal by opening day, I wouldn't rule out Conforto or Lindor staying in New York beyond the season.
And one other thing quickly, Doug, too. It's one thing if you talk about, and we've been through this with the Mets and their pitchers, right? If they're 2 years out or 3 years out, and you say, okay, well, we'll give you some security now and buy out some of your free agent years. That's a different story than when you're in the final year for both the player and the team. So that's why I don't know why we're all caught up in this right now. You project and say, okay, well, we got this guy for a value. Let's lock him up, buy out some of his free agent years. Totally different story. A guy's entering his free agent year. One guy you haven't even seen suit up in your uniform yet and play in New York. I don't get all the talk about the extension just yet.
Yeah, and it'd be one thing if, like Lindor, if he had stayed in Cleveland, for example, he would have done that, like take a page out in the paper, even though technically the Cleveland Indians could sign him and say, "Thanks for all the years of support. Everyone knows he's gone." You know what I mean? But if you're talking about the Braves and Azuna, for example, you have the ability as the Braves to say, "Oh, go do your thing," like because they know that they could. Their camp will reach back out and say, "Hey, Marcel's getting a good offer from so and so. Can you compete with that?" And the Braves can say, "Sure." So it does depend on the market size, but it's a great point that all three of you just made, that the Mets now have the ability to say, "Go do it, test the open market," because you have your confidence in yourself and the money to back it up. That if you get a great offer from somewhere else, great. We could probably counter if we like the player enough. If not, we're fine either way. Let's see. Brian Roberts, very good second baseman from the Baltimore Orioles. Yeah,
for a while. Yeah.
Yankees second baseman as well. Haven't heard anything about
extension down the Orioles. Yeah,
you did extend it. I was trying to remember if you were the one that paid Brian Roberts.
Good base stealer. Haven't heard anything about Kiermaier or Kane for the Mets. Any chance they can acquire as salary dumps? Both seem like great fits. Interesting question. Kiermaier, great defensively. Andy?
Yeah, I think Kiermaier is overpaid for his production right now, would be my initial reaction. I believe, his offensive numbers are in decline, and he's making 14, 15. I'd have to look it up.
He's around, I looked it up last night because a caller called my radio show, but he's around that, like 11, 12, 13, I think, each of the next three.
I don't know. And Kane, I hadn't heard. The answer, Brian, is no. I have not heard anything concretely about either of these guys. Kane makes some more sense to me, maybe for a short-term option in center, though. So I like the idea.
Jim?
I don't know anything more. Kiermaier is certainly available. I don't think Kane is. I think the Brewers, back-to-back postseason, versus he sat it out last year. Kane did. He's looking to come back, and they signed him, gave him an extra year because they knew the individual. He came up in the Brewers organization. So I think that they committed to him going forward to stay there in Milwaukee. So I don't think he's available. Kiermaier would be a salary dump. I think Tampa would take back some money, but to the point of, I'm not so sure that in the end they wouldn't be better off going with Nimmo and a Almora than a Kiermaier, even though Kiermaier is clearly the better center fielder. I personally, if they're going to spend money, I'd like them to see that they would clearly upgrade with Bradley. I know the offense has been a struggle, but it's jumping from. I did this one night on Mets Hot Stove. Defensive run saved. Mets were 25th in center field last year. Bradley was 5th in major leagues. Like, it is a huge jump on the defensive side, and Bradley has more offense. I'd pay the extra money and go get Bradley if they could, and I wouldn't rule that out as an option.
Yeah, that's what I would prefer, what Jim just said. I'd rather have – I mean, I know people are getting caught up in Kiermaier or even Lorenzo Kane. I like Kane, but at this point, no. And I value defense more so than anything else. I just worry about Bradley Jr. because I think he's going to get overpaid. That's the only issue there. The player, I think, fits the Mets, and they have to figure out, as you said, Doug, earlier in the show, how they're going to work that outfield. Obviously, no DH really screws the Mets because they get two guys that aren't outfielders. Yeah. It's a big time problem. If there was the luxury of the DH, it's very simple. Move Nimmo to left. I would move Alonso to DH. We talked about it 100 times. But Jackie Bradley Jr. would be the better fit because he's the better player and the much better defensive center fielder than what the Mets already have.
Yeah, I think you may quickly. Sorry, Doug. I saw that point about the DH. It's good that you raised that because that's actually my reporting on that. I forgot to say is that the fact that even if there is a DH, they won't find out now until late, like maybe the night before opening day, there's a deal for a DH in playoffs. But now we're pretty sure, the teams are pretty sure they have to plan for no DH. And that really creates a problem with signing Bradley for the Mets. Doug, you make a good point about people get hurt. And these questions are sometimes irrelevant ultimately. But the Mets are thinking like, well, no, but really, what do we do with Nimmo and Smith if we sign Bradley with no DH? If there's in a world with an NLDH, I think Bradley would appeal much more to the Mets. And now they're kind of like, is it really, it's affecting the situation, definitely.
If there's one Jackie Bradley Jr. takeaway for our audience, and we've made this point a couple times on BNNY about Jackie Bradley Jr., it should be that he may be as a Met fan, your fallback from Springer. He does not want to get paid like a fallback from Springer. he views himself, and Andy mentioned this earlier, that 50 million, something like that, maybe more. He views himself as a premier defensive center fielder, which he is, and also a guy with power who's coming off a good offensive season.
Yeah.
So, look up his Baseball Reference page, and I think you will be surprised to see the power that he's had, and also the production year after year. The fact that he's been an all-star, that's what he's pitching right now. He and his agent are pitching, I want to be a $50 million guy. I don't want to be a 1 year, $15 million, this team didn't get Springer, so I'll go to that.
And that's the problem, because then the Mets would have to, which look, maybe he's worth that, but then the Mets have to commit. So in years past, and I forget who the examples are, there've been so many where the Mets have had like 2 or 3 guys for one position. None of them are any good. And you say, well, how are they going to find at bats? And then naturally one of them gets hurt and it works out. In this particular case, you've already Conforto's locked in right field. You would have been committed to Jackie Bradley Jr. You have 2 guys who you want in the lineup. Dom Smith's bat has to be in the lineup. He was one of their best offensive players a year ago. So he needs to be in the lineup. Does that mean that Nimmo becomes a 4th outfielder? I would be okay with that. But now you're losing. See, instead of having defense first in center field, but you still have Nimmo's bat in the lineup because of DH, and you have Dom Smith and all the other offense there, now you're losing offense to replace it in center field with just defense with Jackie Bradley Jr. That's why it's an awkward fit.
You get better defensively, you get a little worse offensively. So you look at run creation and run prevention, and then you're right. I think that's a great point, and I know the Mets are thinking the same thing on that one. So I would say the only hope on Bradley coming cheaper could be, Boris is known for his strategy that he calls the pillow contract, where if the market just isn't there this year, he will go that direction sometimes and do a 1-year deal. That is not what they want to do with Bradley. They look at, and I think justifiably, the Boris Corp looks at, they're like, we got Michael Bourne 4 years and $48 million in 2012. That was a long time ago for a player who didn't stick in center field and who didn't have the power that Bradley has. So a decade almost later, Bradley should be able to get close to $100 million. Like, that's their perspective. If Bourne got that years ago. But having said all that, where's Bradley going?
Right.
Red Sox are lukewarm at best. I've heard the Phillies, that's not happening. That's something I think that just Bradley would like out there, but it's not happening. Who's paying a center fielder right now after the Blue Jays have done their thing with Springer? So maybe in another couple of weeks, it's like, all right, fine, 1 year at 15. We'll do this again next year. I think that's possible.
The DH thing is so crazy that we don't know. I mean, look, this is hundreds of $1 million at stake in a decision that we might make the night before the season starts. It just feels a little unfair in a couple ways. Okay, we got it.
Doug, it is very unfair because look at the Yankees, for example. It's unfair that the American League, and it's not just the Yankee Met thing, the American League can build their team in accordance with having the luxury of the DH, and the National League team can, and you're playing interleague play every single day. It is, come on now, let's evolve. And I'm a purist. It's not fair. The Yankees have the luxury of Giancarlo Stanton. They're, $300 million man or whatever can DH, and the Mets can't go get a $15 million a year center fielder because they don't know what to do with the rest of their outfield. It's not fair.
Great point. We have a couple questions. The Guy Corner NYC, upside to the 2 Jakes, Arrieta or Odorizzi? It's an interesting question because I think Odorizzi, lower upside, but you kind of know what you're going to get. And Arrieta has been great, but he's older. I would say Arrieta, but Jim, how does he viewed right now? Do people think he's done, or does he have more left in the tank?
Well, with Arrieta, I think there is some concern about him, just in terms of what he has left in the tank. No question on that. He's a guy that keeps himself in tremendous shape. He's a guy you get, I've known because I drafted him when I was with the Orioles, so I've known him that long. Up until when he was with the Cubs, even I thought he was a good makeup guy. Then you hear him, you're not sure what you hear coming out of Philly. On a 1-year deal, I feel like he's fine. I like Odorizzi. If you look at Odorizzi's numbers and you compare, say you take out just a partial season in 2020, and Odorizzi was hurt, but it wasn't any arm issues. And you just look at 2018, 2019, put Odorizzi next to Bauer, and the numbers are surprisingly close, but for far less. But it doesn't seem like Mets right now are in on Odorizzi at all. So
no,
it's difficult to say. I personally, I'm a little biased because Odorizzi, he comes on my show every year. We do an hour of a show, just like we do with Trevor May. By the way, Trevor May's coming on this week on my show for a full hour. But Odorizzi is
How did
another
you
one of
just
those
masterfully work in a plug into that
just-
answer?
I'm
That was
pro
impressive.
plug.
Just-
I am pro plug.
Just,
Plug away.
just slide it in.
Yeah, very nicely done.
Just sliding that in. But
Time, Jim, and
Odorizzi
where
is a
do people
great
find it?
guy.
What time and where do
Um,
people find it?
And 10 to 1 Eastern time on Sirius XM.
There we go.
XM 89, Sirius 210. But I don't know what they May and Rizzi are coming on. I don't know. I think Wednesday and Thursday. The other aspect with Odorizzi is he has a supporter in the coaching staff with Jeremy Hefner from their Minnesota days. So Hefner, is behind the scenes supportive of Odorizzi too, and for whatever reason, it doesn't seem like there's a fit there, or there's a match from the front office side of things.
You wonder if sometimes you know someone and you like him, and sometimes you know him and you don't as much. So I wonder if those relationships have informed, because you're right, it's a little bit like, why don't the Mets like him? You mentioned the Hefner connection. I don't know. And I also want to say that you made me realize when you didn't know your necessarily your XM channel, I thought for a second, realized I have absolutely no clue what channel on the dial SNY is.
What?
No idea. I don't even, because
Well,
I go,
But that's
I have one of those
different 'cause
remotes you talk into, I go SNY, and it goes to it. We could be channel 600 or 100. I have no clue.
Yeah, I mean, it is also less valuable information because cable is different from satellite radio. If you say
That's
we're
true.
you can't at the QBC say, oh, channel 612, it might be 612 for 5 of the viewers, because cables are different.
But still, to not
Life
know
is a
the
lot simpler. We don't have to memorize.
Well, how would I
numbers.
know?
We don't
How-
have
what
to
do you mean, how would
memorize
you know?
phone numbers anymore, Sal. I don't know
That's
what
true.
your phone number is.
No,
It's not like
Jim,
it's not
I
like
think
on
the-
the polo
radio-
or anything, Sal.
The radio dial is hard to fit. There's so many different channels. Who knows what that's? A TV. Andy, how long you been at SNY? At least 10 years. I mean, I would know the channel by heart. You have no idea what channel it's on?
I have no idea what group of hundreds of channels it's on. I watch it all the time. I just don't know the number of the channel because, again, in this world that we live in, you can say the phrase SNY into the remote and it goes to that channel. So that's what I got.
That's
I'd like to
more
pivot, Doug,
difficult.
if you can, to Jack Schwartz's final question that's in the queue.
But hang on, before we get to Jack Schwartz, Sal, I know you're purposefully leaning back so that you get some love for your sweatshirt.
No.
Only here for the five.
You've been, as Jim was just talking, you're like, height doesn't
Yeah.
measure heart.
Oh my!
Height doesn't
Yeah.
measure heart.
Truth be told, my shoulder is killing me, and I needed to stretch it out a little bit.
For our viewers, Sal is shamelessly promoting Marcus Stroman's clothing brand,
Hey,
which is going to get
is that what that
complicated.
is?
It's going to get complicated when Stroman gives up 5 runs in May, and Sal's on the radio ripping him to shreds.
Stro was a little sensitive on Twitter yesterday to one of my colleagues over at WFA and wasn't happy with the Mets losing out on Bauer. And I was like, I hope
Yeah.
he didn't see the videos or watch me on TV. He's going to hate me. I do think, can I just say this for a second? I do think players have to understand. Like, I love Stroman, right? I love his positive mind. I obviously like his clothing line. I think he's going to have a good year. What we do a lot of times, if not all the time, is not for them. This is entertainment. I could sit here and say, the Mets needed to get Bauer and the offseason's a bust. Doesn't mean I think Stroman stinks or his teammates stink. He's going to take offense to that. That's why he can't pay attention to what's tweeted by the fans or by media, because it's not – I did that video. I'm not thinking what Marcus Stroman is thinking, because obviously it's going to upset him. It seems like you're attacking his team. There's got to be – I love him, but, I got to do my job too, right?
Mm-hmm.
I agree.
Yeah.
I think anytime someone goes after the media as an entity, it's problematic. But I guess I'm biased in that one too. But I didn't like that either. What he did yesterday.
Before we get to Kapil, let's get to Jack's second question.
I like it.
Duquette looks and sounds exactly like my stepdad, except my stepdad knows nothing about baseball. Jack, that's not a question, but I think it's interesting. I'd like to get the
Can I
Duquette
meet your
baseball
stepdad?
where
I'd love to talk to your stepdad.
Wouldn't that be weird
Seems
if
like
he
a
was
good
an
guy.
exact doppelganger? Like really was. Like, oh my God, that's Jim.
The same voice.
So it's-
Maybe
it's-
maybe he could just take over.
You're gonna have to double for the days when you're. Well, you have so many different gigs,
Why not?
Jim, that a doppelganger would not be the worst thing for you. You could be on with us while you're on Sirius and things
That's
like
what
that.
Todd Zeal has. Todd, there are 3 or 4 Todd
That's
Zeals.
a fair point. That's a fair point.
So
One
Jack,
works
get
at
us
SNY
to
most of
set
the time.
that,
One Todd Zeal works at SNY. One's involved in gaming. One has a successful acting career. There's
one
one that
distributes
just like
water
hangs out.
internationally. By the
Yeah,
way,
distributes
so-
water internationally. Lives in Southern California. Okay, so Kapil, I think I'm pronouncing that name right. Apologies if I'm not. I want to let Jim nerd out over the Arenado contract trade, whatever the Rockies decided to do there. But this is an interesting question. Do you think that the lengthy Bauer pursuit hurt the Mets in trying to trade for Arenado? Did not cost the Cardinals a lot. That's an understatement. Well, at least that's my perspective. Maybe I'm just
No, it's
reading
true.
into the
Yeah.
narrative. Jim, what did you think? Do you think the Mets would have been involved if they realized that the Rockies would help pay for it?
Oh boy, I think that that's a possibility that they should have been interested when you look at the overall cost. I know that they have tried they've had conversations in the past, and conversations have gone nowhere between Jeff Bridich and Sandy Alderson. And Jeff Bridich he's a different general manager, the Colorado Rockies GM. He is not easy to deal with, and he's had a prior relationship in dealing with the Cardinals before. And Arenado had a no trade clause. I don't know. We don't know if he would have accepted coming to New York or not, but certainly with in St. Louis, that was one destination spot for him. So it's so many different things to try to jump through to try to figure out. But I do think that when you look at the overall cost, almost every team should have been interested in Arenado. I mean, there's just no denying it. They're getting him for really the same level that you paid George Springer, but Arenado is one of the top 5 players in the sport. And then he had another year or so his AAV comes down. He checks off almost every single box. So yeah, they should. I mean, again, we're just talking about it in a vacuum.
Yeah.
Yes, they should have had interest.
Never
I don't
were.
think
It was.
they-
I mean,
overall.
people always wanted to know about the Mets Arenado thing, and I was like, there is no Mets Arenado thing. Literally, like it just wasn't. I mean, the Mets tried to trade for me as aggressively as they tried to trade for Arenado. It just wasn't a thing. But Jim, you make good points about why maybe it should have been.
Yeah, why not? Well, what's the
I don't know.
reason? He would have been my
There's never
second.
anything there.
I mean, I would have rather have had Springer obviously in center field, but I would have rather had Arenado than Lindor. I mean, I know some people are saying you're nuts. Lindor's a better player, but I mean, Arenado's a hell of a player, and the power offensively, Gold Glove defensively, if not both. I mean, what if that's the price? And I wanted them before I knew what the Cardinals paid for him, which is essentially nothing for that caliber player. Why wouldn't the Mets be in on him? Doesn't make any sense.
I will say that I had visions of like 18 homer seasons with Arenado in Citi Field and away from Coors, and still a brilliant Brooks Robinson-esque third baseman, but I do think the splits, and I know people who've worked in the Rockies organization and people who've played for the Rockies hate bringing up the splits away from Coors, but they tell a story. They tell a story with Trevor Story. You wonder how much you should weigh into them, but I can't help but think about them.
Also, Sandy Alderson is temperamentally opposed to long-term commitments, so he's going to enter. I'm not saying Arenado wasn't the guy for me, but I'm saying Sandy's going to be so careful about trading for someone under contract like that, because he is just, even with Bauer, it was a 3-year offer, and that's why it was appealing. They're like, well, we'll play if it's short-term, and it turned out to be short-term. He was not going to get into a bidding war on Springer. He just really doesn't like long-term deals because he likes the idea that 2 or 3 years down the road, he'll have flexibility to pivot to like younger, better players. Now that sometimes bites him, but I'm just saying that's how he operates.
You just nailed exactly. I mean, we could see it, right? We see that operating. And by the way, the reason why he doesn't like long-term deals, because they never work out.
Yeah,
it's very simple. They never work out. So I can sit here and scream and say, give him the extra year, who cares? They never work out. So I understand that logic. The problem is, Andy, what you also touched on, he's going to miss out. Exhibit A, George Springer. So at some point, if the best players continue to get 6, 7, 8, 10-year deals, at some point you're going to have to commit long term, even with the understanding that it's not going to work out. Otherwise, it's all relying on drafting and developing your own players, which is something that they haven't done, and I know that they hope is going to completely change moving forward.
I will say the one thing that would be worse than signing a player to a long-term deal that you know is going to bite you in the end would be inheriting one that you didn't even negotiate. So like what Brian Cashman had to do for Stanton is kind of like and you know, I know he wanted the player and he's a great player, but I think that would be the cautionary tale to any other GM.
How about Robinson Cano? I mean,
yeah, that's true. That's true, Sal.
Robinson Cano got a big hit last night in the Caribbean World Series, and Juan Lagares.
That's what you've been tweeting out.
He took.
I thought you've been tweeting out like Mets classics.
That's what
this was fun. So everyone was like hanging on the Bauer stuff, and I understand I'm one of the Twitter accounts they were following. As I was covering Bauer, I was luxuriating in the Caribbean World Series, which is like 3 games a day. Just like watch some baseball. It's great. And it was just fun every once in a while to be like, all right, Mets still don't have an agreement with Bauer, and the Dodgers are in. And, oh, by the way, Lagares thrown out trying to stretch. It's like, what
channel is that on? Caribbean
It was on
World
Deportes.
We've got a couple quick hitters here. Elizabeth asks again, can you keep Gary Blevins in the regular BNNY lineup next year, even if he's back pitching with the Mets? We hope to keep him involved with some segments. I'm not sure if they'll be live very often. They might be, but he has loved doing the show. We've loved having him. So I think at the very least, he'll keep doing Hello Jerry if he's on the team, which was a segment for Mets pregame. So he won't disappear from SNY. Joseph asks, Sal, what is all the stuff in your background? Looks like a good collection. You want to briefly explain everything you've got back there?
Yeah, mostly bobbleheads back there from stadiums that I visited. A lot of them are Mets stadium giveaway bobbleheads. A couple others, figures and things like that sprinkled in there of different sports and different teams. But mostly, especially the top shelf, is all stadium bobbleheads that I've either been to or just from Citi Field in general.
And Joe DeMeo wants to know why you've blocked him on Twitter, Sal.
Well, I mean, Joe, there's probably a logical reason for this.
Something probably happened, Joe.
You must have been disrespectful. Now, out of respect to you, because I understand that, you do a lot of good work with the Mets, and I appreciate you asking, and I'm a good guy, I will unblock you. But all I ask for, you can disagree. You can disagree all you want. All I ask for is proper respect. Just be respectful. You hate me for my Bauer opinion, that's one thing. Name calling or being disrespectful or clown opinion or bad take, I don't tolerate any of that. It's an automatic block. But I appreciate you asking, and I will definitely unblock you.
There we go.
Okay.
You mediated
That's
a conflict, nice. Doug.
Putting people together. Brian Roberts asked another question. He says, Andy, you made a comment last night about how you rely on 2 sources while other reporters do not, which was timely last night because we were talking about, as Sal put it, the fake news report. Can you explain how this works and how often it saves you?
Oh, sure. It might save me every day because Jim and I both have a similar process, I think, where we spend the whole day on the phone gossiping with baseball people. That's basically the job. And then after it, you go, okay, what's reportable? So you hear all kinds of good stuff. I'll give you an example. I got a tip that the Yankees finished second on Lindor, and it came from a connected person. But people gossip all the time in the game, and it's all in good fun. It's like, hey, man, I heard that the Yankees finished second. Oh, really? So I could have reported that at the time, but I was like, I'm going to take some time here and try to talk to some Yankee people, and it turned out not to be true. So that's an example of how that works and how that saves you. It also hurts you. See, unfortunately, I have a very tortured relationship with like the value of being the first to report a transaction. I think that there have been many times when I've heard something, I was waiting for the second source, and then another reporter broke the story, and I got beat. So there's a lot of like, damn it, I had that, and that's the cost of being careful. But I think, unfortunately, that if you're wrong once, it's more memorable than being right 100 times.
All right.
So you have to be careful. In fact, I had a really good baseball source tell me on Thursday night that the Mets signed Bauer, like a good source. Mets have signed Trevor Bauer. They have a deal. That would Jim had you had that too? Yeah, doesn't surprise me. It was going around.
Similar.
So that
Had very specific terms.
yes,
Turned out being not true.
wasn't
So the
true.
difference is
Happens all the
Nightingale goes with it, and you guys wait.
I'm not talking about any other person.
No. Well, I mean, he did go with it, so he must have heard the same thing. He goes with it, and the difference is you're saying, well, because I'm not a reporter, so I don't know. But I hear if I have that news, hell, I better. I mean, this is unbelievable. It's a trusted source. I'm going with it. So why then wouldn't you? You guys both need to like double, triple check.
Because you don't want to be wrong. It's like I almost broke Bauer to Dodgers. I was second on it, and I've been like actually angry about it ever since, which sucks. It's a horrible way to live. But if I'd broken Bauer to Mets, I would be upset for like years. Yeah, I remember that for the rest of my life. That's terrible. You can't be wrong on something.
Some
that big,
people,
so that's
some
why you
people
have to
just
wait.
move. Some people just move right on to Dexter Fowler and tweet about Dexter Fowler 17 times.
I don't think
Some people just don't care.
I'm not
You're
part
right,
of this.
Zach.
Yeah.
That's a great
I'm
point.
not part of this.
Keith, we'll wrap up in about 3 minutes. Jim, quickly, because none of you at home may know this, Jim Duquette is really well sourced and is a person that I ask question to about front office stuff, but also does reporting mostly for his work, but not to be first and not to report things on Twitter. So, Jim, do you think that that's partially, along with the regular connections that you have, partially why you get so much information, because sources know that you're not trying to be first about certain things?
Yeah, I think that's solely why I get the information because I have a lot of friends that still work in front offices. I was in front offices for almost 20 years, and I still have deep friendships with them. And I learned this early on when I had a conversation with a couple of friends of mine, and then I reported it, and then they came back to me later like, dude, you almost got me fired because I told you information because of our friendship, and it was stuff that I was assuming that you weren't going to put on the air. And so like right away I learned that, man, I got to be much more sensitive to that than I had really thought out. I was just trying to, do what Andy does, what Ken Rosenthal, like these guys are really good at it. There's no way I could even compare to any of that. I don't have those type of sources. I have sources that within the game, they would tell me stuff because they trust me and because it's baseball conversation, not for publication. So I value that more, and so I'd rather just respond or react to it, or if I can help somebody else fill in a blank, maybe I can help in that sense. But I'd rather that than sometimes I get the information, I can tweet it out, but I rarely do that.
Well, guys, this has been great, and I appreciate everything. And Keith, and to Dan as well, thank you so much for allowing us to do this again. Thanks so much for having us. For those of you who are watching, thanks for watching. Thanks for watching Baseball Night in New York as well. This has been really cool technology and really easy for me to use and read the questions. And it's cool that they're up on the screen while we're talking about it. So Keith, well done. We appreciate you doing this.
Thank you guys. Thank you for showing up. I really appreciate it. Dan really appreciates it. And I know all the fans appreciate it. So I'm going to take you guys out one by one. And thank you so much. Talk to you guys soon. And we really appreciate it.
Thank you. Later, man.
Yeah, everybody.